Have you ever felt a deep, nameless dread? Not fear of something specific, but a general unease at the possibilities before you? That sense of existential hesitation was first described, named and problematized by one man, Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. Born in Copenhagen in 1813, Kierkegaard is often called the father of existentialism, and his grappling with personal anguish laid the foundation for philosophers like Heidegger, Sartre, and Camus. But who was he, and what exactly did he mean by angst? Søren Kierkegaard grew up as the youngest of 7 siblings in a devoutly religious, well-to-do family. His father, Michael, was a wealthy merchant with a profound, heavy spirit, what Kierkegaard would call tungsind, or spiritual melancholy. His mother, N, had been the family housemaid before marrying Michael, and together they suffered the loss of 5 children, an atmosphere of grief that permeated the household. As a sensitive child, Kierkegaard was precocious, drawing inspiration from biblical sermons and poetic text. He entered the University of Copenhagen in 1830 to study theology, but it took him 10 years to complete his studies, and he never became a pastor. Instead, he devoted himself to writing, journals, philosophical treatises, aphorisms, and disguised pseudonymous texts. One of the greatest influences on Kierkegaard, and the key psychological drama of his life, was his turbulent relationship with Regine Olsen. Engaged in 1840, Kierkegaard pulled away the next year. He felt emotionally ill-suited for marriage. His life was consumed by melancholia and an inner calling that he believed sprinted ahead of convention and his own well-being. Regine, unaware of his internal conflict, was deeply wounded. Kierkegaard, however, would later insist he freed her from a man unfit for love. This personal rupture haunted his writing. In books like Either Or, published in 1843, Fear and Trembling, published in 1843 under the pseudonym Johannes de Silencio, and The Concept of Anxiety, published in 1844 as Vigilius Haufniensis, Regine's absence is almost a silent character, its emotional weight haunting the edges of knowledge, freedom, and responsibility. It was in The Concept of Anxiety, published 1844, that Kierkegaard introduced angst, a specifically existential phenomenon akin to anxiety. He writes that anxiety is freedom's actuality as the possibility of possibility. For Kierkegaard, anxiety is deeper than fear. It's the creeping sense that because we can choose anything and choose wrong, we feel dizzy at the infinite horizon of choice. But he didn't see it purely as pathology. Anxiety is a human opportunity. It reveals our potential and our responsibility. It is what moves us from an unconscious life of conformity, the aesthetic sphere, to an authentic life marked by free, committed choice and ultimately faith. To understand why this mattered, we must contrast Kierkegaard with the philosophical landscape of his time. Immanuel Kant had explored practical reason and the moral imperative, while Hegel believed we progress through a grand historical dialectic, reason unfolding in time. Kierkegaard saw something missing: the individual, the real person, living conscious, moral, and existential choices, not abstract reason or historical necessity. Thus, Kierkegaard writes not as an academic, but as an author, to you, the single individual. Addressing himself in his journals, and often adopting pseudonyms, he destabilizes certainty and invites curiosity. He undermines the possibility of a single, fixed truth. Instead, truth is subjective. It belongs to the person who lives it. In Either Or, he contrasts the aesthetic, a life lived for pleasure, immediate satisfaction, against the ethical, which demands commitment and moral self-understanding. He warns that living aesthetically ultimately leads to despair. Sweetness fades, and choices lose meaning. Then, in Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard discusses the biblical figure Abraham, court-martialed by God to sacrifice Isaac. Abraham's anguish is not fear of God, but dread at choosing faith without rational evidence. This is angst in action, a terrifying assertion of possibility, the leap of faith over the abyss of choice. Here he coins a distinction. Fear has an object. You fear a lion or a disease. Angst, on the other hand, is a terror without object. It is dread at freedom, at having possible choices without knowing which is truly right. It is what he calls the dizziness of freedom. Returning to his own life, Kierkegaard knew this personally. He wrote, "To venture causes anxiety, but not to venture is to lose oneself. And to venture in the highest is precisely to be conscious of oneself." This is existential angst made personal, risking his relationship with Regine in order to remain true to his philosophical calling. It was not self-deprivation, but authenticity. This concept of angst, rooted in personal biography, biblical analogy, and psychological insight, revolutionized how philosophers viewed anxiety. Where previous philosophers might have seen human wrongness as ignorance or social failing, Kierkegaard saw a deeper condition rooted in freedom itself. Knowing you can do anything, but also that you must do something. After Kierkegaard's death in 1855 at age 42, his work faded from immediate view, but re-emerged with the rise of existentialism in the 20th century. Thinkers like Martin Heidegger recognized his contribution. Heidegger's Being and Time echoes Kierkegaard's idea of authenticity and angst at being, but grounded in ontology. Sartre declared him the spiritual predecessor of existentialism. Camus and de Beauvoir, Huber, and even writers like Kafka heard in his emphasis on choice, despair, and subjectivity a source from which the modern condition could be understood. By turning subjective experience into philosophy, Kierkegaard shifts the center of intellectual life from universal reason to the lived stance of the individual. He changed philosophy from what can I know to how can I live. He was the first to describe anxiety not as a disease to cure, but as a signal, proof we are free and responsible. We can still feel Kierkegaard's reach. In psychology, existential therapy asks, what is authentic choice? In contemporary culture, anxiety is often painted as negative, yet we also see creativity, leadership, and moral progress springing from confronting possibility. That is Kierkegaard's paradox. Anxiety is not a flaw in us. It's a function of our capacity to imagine ourselves anew. So what does existential angst look like today? The student staring at an empty application form. The mid-career professional facing a crossroads. The artist trying to create something no one else has. That unresolved tension? It is anxiety in motion, free possibility meeting self. Kierkegaard didn't leave us with a technique, but with a posture, to own the dizziness without surrendering, to call our anxiety friendship with choice. He says, "Whoever has learned to be anxious in the right way has learned the ultimate." That's the legacy we return to now, how Kierkegaard invented existential angst. It wasn't just naming it, it was threading it into modern identity, freedom, ethics, theology. His reflections deliver a gift. Anguish can be a signpost rather than a breakdown. The recognition of anxiety is where authenticity begins. Thank you for traveling through this philosophical genealogy. If this sparked your curiosity, press like to support this kind of content and subscribe to Hyperpower History for more historical narratives behind philosophy's greatest ideas. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning what it means to be you.